dancing has been always cultural politics, embodied politics.
MAK Conversation Pieces, der MAK-Podcast für Vermittlung und Outreach.
Welcome to another conversation piece in the MAK. This time we're speaking in English. We invited the artist, curator and researcher Bogomir Doringer to talk about the question, can Rave save culture? With our MAK curator for digital culture, Marlies Wirth, and then invited the audience to join the talk. The talk was part of the exhibition, The Fest. Enjoy.
Warm welcome also from me, Bogomir. It's good to have you here in multiple forms, in real life and a digital presence. Also, just on this note, some of you might have seen it already, but on the back side of this screen, you can see the actual artwork, because this is a context interview of Bogomir for this exhibition, I Danced the Dance of Urgency. Starting off this conversation piece, as Janina mentioned, we are in the exhibition The Fest, which is concerned about fest and partying in all different forms in the cultural, historic review. And we are now in the present, looking into the future in this space, concerned with contemporary culture, and a very important part of contemporary culture and the fest and revolutions actually is the rave, the club, the clubbing, dancing as a cultural expression. And Bogomir has been concerned with dance as a cultural expression or form of communication in his work, his research for many, many years. He has also curated exhibitions about this topic, doing constant work about it. And yeah, let's hear it from you. Why is dancing so inherently important for us as a human culture? What does it signify?
Okay, first, that's like a radio station. Yeah. Thanks for that. Okay, so the first hello from my side. Actually, I first want to say that it's first time that I'm stepping on a stage that I actually feel very relaxed and kind of blessed and pleased, which I think it also comes from the hospitality, and I want to thank for the organization and also actually all of you here. But yeah, speaking of dance, where to start? From weddings in Serbia, where I would climb on tables and make a show out of it, and kind of giving a sign that I'm definitely queer from an age of 4, or to 1999 and dancing during NATO bombing in Belgrade and kind of planning how to change the city and the country in which we were stuck, or so for me, dancing has been always there as a form of resistance, survival, coping mechanism, and that's how I understood the dance. And then on the other side, once I moved to Netherlands, I was very much exposed to this idea that dance is something that comes just from pleasure and joy, and kind of a word for hardworking hours. So that was this clash of very different understandings of what dance is, and basically that was a trigger or motivation or another struggle of kind of trying to understand how do I fit in a society where that's how dance is being understood. So yeah, that's in short.
That's actually very beautifully framed. So dance is both. Dance can be joyful and a fun experience that you do after work, after you have your duties fulfilled. You can go into the night and release all the energy. Or it can be something that you have to do in order to fight for something. And especially with communities or the LGBTQ community, we all remember dance parades, like the Rainbow Parade that's still going on, Pride Parade, where dancing and expressing yourself is also very important. And one major thing that we had lost during the past years in the pandemic are clubs as spaces where dancing, contemporary forms of dancing, alone or with others is basically done. So why is club culture so important? How would you frame that?
Yeah, I mean, there's this also kind of conflict in me because, of course I'm for club culture, but then we also have here examples where we see how crowds need to be managed from public space into some kind of boxed, designed environments with some kind of rules and regulations and hopefully economic interest around them. So for me, I love clubs, but I also recognize that clubs are a form of a control or designed environment for managing of rituals in a way. And of course there are different clubs. There are clubs for yuppies, there are clubs for networking, there are clubs for fashion models, there are clubs for this and that. There are different functions of clubs, and there are clubs also that can be socially, politically very important. So we also need to differentiate. When I say club culture, it's quite broad. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, you're mentioning pandemic. It's interesting to see how different countries approach funding or financial support to clubs in very different ways. So, for example, in Netherlands, it was clear that clubs are, sort of seen as a spaces where, some kind of dodgy exchange is happening, as spaces for, they're in line with casinos, in line with prostitution, and that's mostly how they are internationally seen. But then there are also clubs that did fight for recognition that they are cultural spaces and centers, and that's something that Berlin has been pushing, Switzerland, eventually Amsterdam. There's also initiatives in Vienna. So there's a kind of change of understanding what clubbing is, what club culture is, and also what those spaces, without those spaces, how do cities look like, or how do vulnerable communities come together if they don't feel welcome in a space like this? Where is the culture and participation for people who don't speak the language or who are maybe not able to express themselves? So during pandemic, what happened is that, for example, in Netherlands, there was a higher amount of overdoses. Definitely, of course, more depression, and also it was clear that these places have some kind of role of a mental hygiene, of managing mental hygiene. And hygiene is a bit ugly word, but it is that. It is of a space where you can release certain emotions with the others and feel that that's okay. So I also didn't have clubs during Corona, and I have to say it's the first time that I felt so down in my life. Like, I really feel that I touched like a total kind of bottom, and a very, very feelings or sensations that were unfamiliar to me before. So for me, dancing has been a way of keeping myself sane, keeping myself meeting people that I like, but not people that I need, or people that I am interested because of work or because of some strategies. Like people that I truly, in a very honest, playful way, like, because we dance together. So I think this is also interesting. When you turn off the night, when you push the night away, what do we do during the daytime? We're all trained to position ourselves, to surveil each other, to judge if we have enough money or not, if this person can provide me with something or not. So it's terrible. I mean, for me, all my friends, all my network came from nightlife. So when you don't have that, we are controlled, designed, managed, governmentally regulated, religious, whatever you want. We are controlled human beings, and what Corona also showed, we are definitely not belonging to ourselves, but we belong to government. So we are regulated. And the night is a space where, or night, it can also be daytime, but we need those spaces where we can get rid of those restrictions. So, but we will come to that a little bit more.
Absolutely, and that's touching very important points. So I'm trying to follow suit with a few of the things that you covered here. Clubs as spaces of the night, as community spaces, as social spaces that are kind of a third place, as it's called. It's not home, it's not work, but it's a social space where you can meet people that you're not intentionally wanting to meet. Not your friends, not your colleagues, but random people that you come together for the main interest of expressing yourself, being there, dancing, listening to a certain kind of music, dressing a certain kind of way. But also it's a designed and controlled environment in itself. As you mentioned, like, of course, there's a doorman, there's maybe a policy of no drugs, there's policies of no mirrors, no photos, which we also can talk about a bit. Why is that and why is it so important? And on the other hand, it's a space where you can lose control, even though being in a safe space, or in a hopefully safe space for most communities. And that ties into the question of why are clubs so political? Because in some places you can't express your identity out on the streets because it's regulated, it's forbidden. And it was important that you mentioned these different kinds of clubs. Like, is it just for entertainment? Is it very commercial? Is it very like pop cultural? Or is it an underground theme? Like, for example, you mentioned the clubs in Ukraine, in Kiev, or in Georgia, the Bassiani. That is also a topic of this piece you're showing. So can we, I don't know how to start, but these are all questions I would relay further to go deeper into that topic.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. So I think at some point you'll see these observations from a bird's eye view where I started attaching the camera above the dance floor, and honestly at the beginning I couldn't film the parties that I liked, so I was like, okay, I first need to maybe start with parties that I don't like. As long as, like you're moving with your idea, I was ready for it. But then I did document parties that I don't like, but what I saw was actually something that I really liked. So, I realized that different people, different groups have need for different kind of rituals. And if those rituals are not my ritual, that's fine. I don't necessarily need to like them. I don't need to like the music. I don't need to like the way how people dance.
For example, like the mosh pit or like the headbanging, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I tried the mosh pit. Of course I did. I had to. But like, it's not necessary that I'm aiming for a mosh pit party. So that example is actually very masculine ritual that happens inside of a club, and that's totally fine. Like, I think it's amazing that there is a possibility and playful space where that energy can be released. So I'm all the time looking back, kind of hoping that it will appear.
We can also move with the images, but we are back in Belgrade in this case. So.
No, I don't want to go back to Belgrade.
Let's stay out of there for now.
So yeah, dance has like all these different functions, and then all these spaces are there to activate those functions. So, is it martial? Is it erotic? Is it liturgical? Is it competitive? Is it political? So for me, it was interesting to understand that it's not the spaces that I like or dislike. It's actually important to have spaces where these Eros and Thanatos, because, like we're always talking about night, they're like these strange energies, and we're talking about being safe, but also things we do in a night are not necessarily safe. Being drunk or consuming drugs or going around in altered state of consciousness or playing with all kinds of role-playing sexual energies, it's not always safe. So it's that strange environment in which this is sort of possible, yeah. So I actually kind of forgot what was the question.
I thought so, no worries, I will remind you. Maybe let's speak about these places where outside of them it's not safe to be queer, for example, in Georgia, and talk about a little bit what the role of Bassiani Club was and how it became basically the starting point of the so-called Rave-olution, which led to protest in front of the parliament to fight for human rights, basically. Maybe that would be interesting.
Well, yeah, I would say that some clubs are reflection of social political structures that are very obvious, and some clubs are opposition of that. So, another thing that actually where you were speaking, I mean, clubs are so important for art. So parties are important for art. So museums wouldn't exist if artists did not party. Like everything that we're harvesting is result of parties and of rituals, individual or collective. So just to kind of bring that in. So for me, it's interesting when the reality outside clubs is very different than what clubs are feel like. So if you go to Bassiani, it feels like ego is left at the wardrobe. I loved it. I love clubs where at the wardrobe your ego is already dissolved. It's fantastic to be in a space where people are sharing or talking to strangers or dancing in 360 degrees direction instead of worshiping a god, a DJ. So you know that's a very different environment. But by having that imaginary, dreamlike fantasy space, these people together imagine, envision what the reality outside could look like. And they're kind of motivated, but not again by some kind of political agendas and papers and lectures, but actually because they know that they could dance together. And that's what's fantastic, because if you think of clubs, we go out in a night at 4 a.m. when we are supposed to be in the deepest dream. We are actually with open eyes dancing together. So our body, our chemical constellation, whatever, is not the same as 4 p.m. in an office. We are in some kind of altered, transformed, fantasy, strange moment, and we are together moving and sensing the space. 1 a.m. is not the same as 4 a.m. 8 a.m. is not the same as 1 a.m. So, you know, we are with... we are actually giving up a dream, giving up a sleep, and putting ourselves in a state that is quite different. So that's something to not forget, that, you know, things we do in a night are, I mean, they're ritualistic transformations that we in a Western society abandoned and didn't speak about, and always projected as something that is happening in a less modern society. So we actually don't really know what's going on when we are dancing together. It's a totally unknown field, and this is actually what I think it's fascinating, that through music and through clubs and through these kind of rituals, we are actually today talking about, well, we're asking ourselves what's actually going on, and that was my also main kind of interest as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's very important what you said about the night. Like the night is also associated like with the occult, or like the shady business, or like the gangsters meet in the night. Vampires, obviously, and conspire to bring the empire down. So I think that's very suitable. And also the ritualistic part of dancing. So as we know, all kinds of dances have evolved as a ritual, like the waltz in Vienna, very big one, or like parades or line dancing. But of course also dancing in clubs, so leading to your actual works that, as I mentioned, can be seen on the backside of the screen. So Bogomir started filming, as he mentioned, from a bird's eye perspective, like different dance rituals. And it's very interesting once the collection has evolved and you have comparisons to look at which kinds of rituals, gestures and signs are there actually. So maybe you want to tell us a bit about the differences that you noticed, or like the signifiers that you saw.
Yeah, I think, well, first I was interested in looking crowd as a kind of an organism, almost as one entity, rather.
Like a collective intelligence, like a swarm, right?
Sort of. Yeah, I mean, the truth is that, you know, like, I'm generation that also grew up on ketamine, so the out-of-body perspective is something that is quite familiar to my generation, especially those that were going out. But then another thing, if we think of technology today, we're all the time thinking about ourselves from a bird's eye view, which is not common in 20th century. You know, if you're, I don't know, ordering Uber, or if you are looking in your phone, you're always this dot presented in a grid. So we are very much thinking about our actions through the top view. And that perspective used to be only for gods, but now is for Google. So for me it was interesting, like, okay, how do we look like? How do we now look like if there is a camera above? So what are the proximities between us? Who is very comfortable with sitting with each other? Who is not? Why the bench behind is empty? So, you know, how do we decide that this is our constellation today? Okay, there were chairs there, which was that was coming from us, but how do you now together merge into this body? And then how does dance help us to navigate through that space? And then the more you think, and very often dance floors are, you know, you have obvious crowds moving or individuals, and then you have people that you would say they don't move. But if you zoom in, they're navigating with their fingers, or like they have this very slow move. So when you zoom in, there's a lot of movement going on. And especially if they're dancing with closed eyes, so it's a kind of almost like a virtual reality navigation. So for me, then became more interesting, like, okay, so what are these gestures and what is the intention of the gestures? So, you know, am I pushing people away, or am I inviting them? Am I fluffy or very territorial, or do I have some kind of national symbols? You know, like Dutch are very known for finger in the air. So, you know, Serbians are more coming like this. So where does this come from? Like, and another interesting thing, in clubs, we start mirroring each other. So what I'm doing here, sooner or later, you'll be doing there. And then we kind of, ooh, now we're a team. Oh, but then when he joins us, that's, ooh, now there's three of us. If you go often to the same club, that club has its own dance. That group has its own dance. That becomes a subculture. That subculture becomes a movement. That movement becomes a music industry source. So, you know, like, it's motion is very fascinating, and it can come from very simple, very small movements, and then can kind of grow into larger movements. So the idea was then, okay, so I have a large sample of crowd, but what happens when you zoom in? And how do you make a movie out of 30 hours of footage where it looks like nothing is changing, but actually those changes are happening every minute with every person in that crowd? So yeah, that was
you made that, and I think
crowds,
that's a good notion right here. We have the no phones, no cameras thing, which I wanted to tap into, because we are nowadays used to like filming, photographing everything we do, sharing it. Why is it so important, do you think, that many clubs, and I think Berghain is known for a very, very strict policy of that, forbid you to take photos and share images or videos? What does it signify? Why is it important?
I mean, it's unpleasant to have camera in your face with flash while you're dancing, and also dancing is quite intimate, and you can be very vulnerable as well. So also, what is the intention of that footage? But also, you know, so now to go like a little bit, so you know, like some African dances, the camera's presence is not allowed because you can catch an evil spirit. There is a release of all kinds of energies, and I think very often the way how we think about dance, which is like, ooh, you know, like everybody's happy, is totally wrong, and this is a fabrication of a Western culture in trying to normalize us and how we behave when we are dancing.
Or make it into an entertainment industry, because...
Yeah, so as long as Madonna is naked on a stage, it's fine, but in audience, please stay normal. So that's another thing, like the performing dance instead of doing it yourself, which is very common in American culture, is that anything can happen on a stage, but in an audience we will behave. Another thing is like, if we think about, so no camera was actually a strategy to make people move again, because camera presence and phones were seen as suspicious. And in order to make the reach, I mean, it's same, like if you would all be now on social media, I mean, like it would feel very lame and the vibe would be off. So it's same on a dance floor.
To sustain the experience, right? If you want to dance and let loose, you can't be filming it at the same time.
And getting in state of trance requires time, dedication, repetition, duration. So phones are interrupting that,
Absolutely, but moving on to, because we are having been reminded of time a little bit. No, we're good? 20? Okay.
Okay.
Still moving along. Staying with the topic of phones, and it's also part of, we will see it here or saw it before while waiting. Looking into our phones, watching other people dance has become an even bigger thing during the pandemic, referring to the social media platform TikTok, where obviously like sharing a dance and having others stitch that, imitate that, make it into their own has become a thing. But also not only for fun, so it's also a very politically charged issue. It can be, for example, we just a few days ago there was Iranian girls dancing, which is forbidden in Iran in public, but it was shared and people are doing it in honor of them and keep going. So how is that kind of dance, watching people dance through your screen, also important or can do something with you?
Yeah, I mean, watching people dance makes us move. I mean, like that's like, you go to dance theater and that's what it does. We don't move, but by watching movement, we move. So in Georgian case, like if there was no camera to document dancing in front of parliament, that event would burn down and it wouldn't work out. So it was important to have camera. So by watching people dancing in front of parliament, there was empowerment in both directions. It was a reminder of what it means to dance for political reason. It's same with girls in Iran, having 4 or 5 girls dancing in front of camera. It's not a big group, but it does something to us, and it means to them to know that they're being watched. And so there is that kind of exchange. And it's interesting, in times of pandemic, dancing ritual became a coping mechanism in front of social media. So I actually really enjoy TikTok. But then again, dancing on TikTok is very time limited and you're imitating the moves. So it's very performative. You're definitely not going into state of trance and like going on TikTok. So it's the format in itself also doesn't allow it. But it was also interesting how it meant to people to see a few seconds of somebody dancing at home. And also I think in times of Corona, I even heard that people that never wanted to dance before, they would be like, oh, I miss dancing so much. Like, so
absolutely.
I think we globally also understood what it means to not be allowed to go out, to not be allowed to dance, to not have a place to go out, to not have a place to heal, to not even have a place to celebrate life or whatever. But it also, I think, maybe finally made us understand what it means to not have visa to come to study at Angewandte, or what it means to, well, not be allowed to leave the country. So I don't know, it's interesting because dancing is like kind of like an art form, but we all have access to it. Even if we are not artists, we all can be good or bad dancers, but it's something that is naturally in us even before we start talking. So yeah, like it's interesting, the ritual of dancing migrated into TikTok, social media, and as well in virtual reality. And it almost, the spaces for self-organization happen in a digital environment. And that was for me very unexpected. Kind of a motion or movement integrating itself into new technologies, but again, like a very old school ritualistic practice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also something interesting. Like for me as a curator of digital culture, you being also at Next Museum, head of education and research, we have been talking about this idea of can dancing, or like the experience of dancing with a crowd or clubbing, actually be moved into a virtual space? Is it the same? Is it definitely not the same, but is it something in its own which could be something? And I think you had some interesting thoughts on that, why it actually could work in virtual reality.
Yeah, I mean, it works. It's also what for me is interesting is that good clubs are always in cool cities. So it's always in a capital. And so if we speak about access, inclusivity, then where do all the people who don't live in cool cities go out? Well, in virtual reality is possible. And also there's another element in virtual reality is that, like in VR chat, like this idea of partying is a way of building the communities, experimenting with space, but also digital environment can allow something that we normally through chemical consumptions or drugs. So like you're in a fantasy world. The architectural forms don't need to be respected. The time and space are molded. So I'm very interested how a ritual of dancing is feeding into this development. And also there was an interesting example of VR parties that were happening in Peru. So these people created a sound system, and the sound system was, like digital, and they invited people, they had VJing, they had music, and then when the restrictions were done, they met for the first time in live, and they created a mini festival. So the self-organization started actually in a digital environment, and then it kind of moved to the space. Another interesting thing, because we're talking about TikTok, I do also recognize that dancing can be politically also manipulated. I mean, same as it can be for anti-Russia or like a pro-EU in Georgia, it can also be for right-wing or any kind of agenda. So just because the crowd is dancing, it doesn't mean that I think you always need to observe it very carefully. And normally maybe it's not even by watching it visually, but it's more how that crowd feels once you are inside of it. So yeah, there is plenty of music festivals, but only few feel right. So yeah.
Yeah, that's also an important note, like how you feel in a certain kind of community, like in a coming back to the clubs and what they promote as their values and how that is important, because the topic is also like how can rave save culture? We don't know yet, but that rave or club culture, the one we spoke about, not like the commercial entertainment industry, the important club culture also feeds a lot into culture as we know it in cultural institutions. For example, leading to thinking about more inclusivity, being a communal space, looking at different societies. Like this is a very productive relationship that we tried actually to imitate what clubs did some years ago.
I think what art institutions are doing now, it's actually what clubs have been pushing maybe 10 years ago. So, how do we create diverse exhibition, who is represented, who is not. So yeah, I mean, we're actually looking at this footage that that I was mentioning. So we can very fast ask, okay, so where are women on this floor? Is this queer party? Where is it? It's in Amsterdam. Okay, Amsterdam is quite multicultural, but most of these people are white. So why there are no people of color? We can also think who is DJing. Like there was a research a few years ago in Vienna where only 2 female DJs would perform per year, and one of them would be Nina Kravitz, I think. So if those things did not start in a night, and then from night demonstrate how bookings can change, how clubs can rethink their way that they their door policies, how festivals have to reshape themselves because the new generation is asking for something else. That movement and that motion, of course, with, you know, Me Too movement or Black Lives Matter also started reshaping our daily life. And at the moment, art institutions in Netherlands are being shaken because of toxic environment, because of sexual harassment, because of corruption. So this is something that started in a very small places. It was almost rehearsed and then leaked into the streets and then into you and young generation. And then you started demanding that change also on institutional level. So for me, it was no surprise that that movement is happening now, because if you look into these small, unrelevant samples, you could also sense what is not right. Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's I think that's a good note to open up also the discussion on club or rave can definitely save culture. It is definitely influencing the way we think about our culture, we think about our communities, inclusivity and diversity. We still have a long way to go here, but we are trying to do that. And I would like to actually open up the floor for either questions or also remarks, personal stories about why clubs are important or why dancing, what it means to you, what it means to your culture. Please feel free to step into the discussion.
And just to also mention that, I mean, museums are globally now doing topic of rave, of dancing, of this topic is necessary to reinvent what the museums are. So what we are doing here is ritual of repair or healing, of rethinking how do we move in the future. So for me, it's also interesting that this topic it's very hot. Like so yeah, it's kind of.
That's why you are here, and we have to show.
Thank you both, Marlies and Bogomir. What I actually wanted to ask you, Bogomir, is kind of about a greater scope that clubbing or clubbing practices could have in society. And we're living in representative parliamentary democracies, which require strategies and inauthenticity, so to say, to reach wider goals. And as initially, kind of in the conversation, you made this opposition between the daily life that is super full of strategy and, you know, thinking twice and judging and stuff. So do you think that, or in which way do you think can clubbing still bring this utopic potential into society while we have a representative democratic system? Thank you.
So, I mean, it's what I was, well, actually it will come soon. I mean, it's interesting to think we take dancing today as kind of for granted, you know, like, oh, I don't feel like dancing, oh, I don't like to dance. But like to come to the point that we can actually do all these moves that we are doing, which is a collection of historical references, the global movements. It was a really long process. So we came to the point in 2020 where, you know, you can even refer to video games moves when you're dancing. So we are like archiving so much free movement. But then yet, there are examples in history where people were not allowed to move, where women were not allowed to dance alone, where men were not dancing if it's not in a very strict, regulated military way. So we also, same as we think that it's just there, we also need to understand that it can easily be taken away and very fast forgotten. And even pandemic, which was very short, was enough for some people to lose that kind of, well, touch with their body and movement. So I don't want to be, well, actually I do want. I think we're reaching a point where, you know, we are pretty much compressed from different sides. There is a fear of wars. So it's very important to not let those spaces for experimentation of movement. And I'm not thinking about art spaces, I'm thinking about clubs to not disappear. And another thing is, I know that also cities like Vienna, Amsterdam, Berlin are for sure interested in having a dialogue and thinking how to create spaces or prevent that these spaces disappear as well. So yeah, I always use example of, if you need to start dancing, like which body part you start moving first. So most of us would be like, legs, and then a little bit hips, but not too sexual, because that can be vulgar or too provocative. And good luck to come the point where you feel that you can do this. This is full-on liberation. This is a moment where ecstasy is kicking hardcore 3 a.m. and you're like, so this movement is not easy. I mean, we can very fast measure to what point we are restricted and actually disconnected from our bodies. So that can then become a motivation for any kind of dialogue, any kind of discussion, negotiation, thinking of spaces, but also asking question, are we actually really free inside of this system that have these cool tag words, but actually I even don't have a club in Vienna where I can go and feel very pleasant. So what does this say about capital of Austria? Where is that place? Give me that place. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Sorry, I just wanted to take one sentence that you said that I find particularly important. The notion that you said, I don't feel like dancing, it just came to me, expression of utmost freedom at this point, because you have the freedom to say, I'm out in the street or here, I don't feel like dancing, but I could. I would be allowed to do it here on the street in front of MAK, wherever, on Heldenplatz. I'm allowed because I'm an Austrian woman living in Vienna. Let's think about all those places, currently, again, reminding of the Iranian girls, where you are not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to dance in public. And I think this is a very important choice of the notion of feeling free to move your hands up or to even move at all is like, yeah, the utmost expression of freedom for me at the moment is like, I don't feel like dancing is actually a good thing because I could if I wanted to.
Yeah, but my question will also be, what club in Vienna would be club where a woman would go alone to dance, or trans person? I mean, I know Vienna in a night, it's not nice. It can get very disturbing. You get easily sexually harassed. You get commented. Toilets are terrible. Gets very vulgar. So where are these spaces? Where is this high culture that we are promoting? So yeah, so I think the change comes from, like small places, but small club, 100 people. But the club that has those values needs to happen, and then those bodies can multiply and change the city. Yeah.
Absolutely, that would be preferable.
Yeah.
Any more questions or ideas or hints for new clubs where Bogomir could go to? Feel safe.
I know that some cool kids are planning to open clubs, so
that's a good thing. Keep me posted.
I think by September. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, but it's an art initiative, so
it should happen.
Hi, I would like to ask about these aspects of political meaning for rave, and you mentioned Georgia and also Ukraine. Could you please tell what you mean, how this political potential of rave could, how rave could be potential, political in this place? And also aspect how this political potential could turn into consumption afterwards, because it could be also easily.
So that's what I call dance of urgency. So it's a moment where you start moving because you have to move. It's kind of a form of a survival. It's a coping mechanism. And so what's also interesting, if you constantly dance out of urgency, you eventually burn out. But then after urgency, there is always a moment of translation of that into consumerism, into business, into commercial. Like Exit Festival started as a student protest in Serbia, now is like the most commercial festival in Serbia. Hippie movement, whatever, Woodstock, eventually that urgency is kind of, it burns down, which is great. So you cannot keep on dancing from urgency for very long, especially generationally. It's very consuming because nightlife is consuming. So for me, it's also interesting how you have those transition of 5 years. Every 5 years, new scene starts learning to move, and then they conquer the club, and then they create the movement, then they slowly disappear. So there's also that moment of giving up or letting go or allowing other moves to happen. What was interesting with Georgia, or I was mentioning Exit Festival, I mean, clearly that youth started organizing itself to create a space where they can do something that was not possible, or create that kind of, it was also strategically created as space for creating social political opposition. So
on display right now, like
oh
in
yeah,
the
yeah.
football stadium.
So for example, Nargol Gharahshir, and so one of the founders of Bastiani, so she clearly says, we created this space to create social political opposition. We created a space where we will make Georgians that don't like each other dance together, where you would have like, hooligans dance with sex workers, with trans activists. So a space where we can rehearse and imagine and make a plan how we're going to change the outside. So that's I never heard somebody so directly saying we were from beginning very political. Eventually that also placed them on a map, which brought attention to tourism. So you were talking. So, of course, like then everybody was like, oh, we go to Bastiani, we go to Kiev because it's hot and it's so, but there is nothing wrong in that, because that also brings certain economy for certain groups and it grows. For me, what is, for example, in Kiev, what happened with K41, and I think there was also graffiti, so it's a club with no name. Somebody wrote, your dance floor is now a war zone, or something like that. So there's also this moment that audience that comes and consumes that culture eventually in times of crisis disappear. But I think in cases of Georgia, and even with fundraising like in Kiev, there is also support from abroad. So yeah, I don't know like if I'm answering, but like it's amazing how club culture can, in a period of few years, place city like Tbilisi on a map, transform the youth, and obviously give a sign that they're pro-EU. You could also say that that's European Union propaganda, which is also a way to think. But it is intentionally creating of a space and dance floor to create political and social movements. So I don't know if I kind of answer your question, but yeah. If you want to add something more, I'm happy to just to get to it. It's a good one.
Yeah, it's like super. Thank you. And just interested to mention that in one point, like being in Ukraine, in Kiev, it's kind of also feels that it's a way of aestheticization of ruins, because raves could happen in ruin landscape, but also so it's a way to kind of function in these ruins, but also the way of aestheticize. It's also kind of a little bit controversial and.
Yeah, it's a process of transformation, and like and I think it's also. There is, for example, there is this social Instagram profile, German techno, which I can't stand. And it's like, it's like always these kids dancing like ninjas and kind of like bam, 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 bam. And you're like, I actually really have a problem with it, because it's hooking up itself on the Georgian and Ukrainian values and scene, but it's actually extremely exploiting that and pushing that to German techno, which I'm like, first, techno is not German, so there's so many layers of problem. It's like very problematic profile, and then kind of those bodies almost swallow the fight and struggles of those. So that's like an interesting way of consuming, which happens in a just Instagram social profile. So that's something that is now happening with like a music industry. Those values and that fire, that honest appreciation of dancing together is being exploited by commercial models from Western Europe and actually even States. So that's kind of interesting how, and then sometimes in those videos, they would also actually integrate videos that are not from Germany, but because it's German techno, everything becomes German. And this brings me to a topic that dancing has been always cultural politics and body politics. So, okay, this is now a totally different chapter, but you know, having French dance in UK was impossible. You had like a serious, it would be forbidden. You wouldn't be allowed to embrace the dance of a neighbor country, or you couldn't dance like Elvis Presley couldn't dance as a black man because it was overly sexualized. He even ended up in the military and like kicked out of states. So before that kind of exchange was monitored and forbidden, but now we have another example. Now we actually can swallow it and just kind of embody it and perform it, and that way actually delete the communities from where the dance comes, which is very much what pop culture does, and that's what happens with hip-hop, with jazz, all this music that comes from resistance, we just swallow, translate, and then make it joyful, while it's actually about suffering of communities that we even don't think about sometimes. So that consumption is something that I find,
Do you have an explanation, or what is your explanation for the discussion in dance culture or rave culture that the hardcore continuum kind of got stopped, or that there is no new style in music-wise, actually, in the last 2 decades? Yeah. And yeah, I mean, there's many theories around it, but I would like to hear yours.
Yeah, I'm all the time thinking, when will I go to club and be like, ooh, what the fuck is this? I can't stand it. Or when will I get surprised that the music is just, I don't get it. Like, I don't know, like I want that moment that my parents would be when I would play something. Like I want that shock effect. But it's not happening. So there is this loop, and there is also something very strange how we think about time at the moment. Like it doesn't really matter if it's old or new. It would happen if even the way how we watch television, you know, I can watch one TV show in 7 hours. I can go back. I can play. Everything is kind of becoming this. So anyway, this may be another, but like I'm waiting for a style that will surprise me. And then somebody recently addressed that basically Africa is exploding from all kind of music and different directions. That I was a little bit familiar through Nyege Nyege Festival, which was a festival that became kind of queer Ugandan festival because the gay pride was cancelled. And then they gave free tickets to everybody who came, who dared to come. And then suddenly this festival became a kind of LGBTQ empowerment of them. So anyway, through that festival, you could sense the new genres. But of course, we're talking about controlling of market. We all dance to German techno. And that has been, Berghain was fighting for that. We all got reversed to that. Now there is Dutch hardcore gabber, so here we go. Then we have American, this kind of squeezing balloons music, like, so, and then of course we have American pop culture. So the market is controlled, so I'm sure that there is something that we will be totally in shock or surprised, but algorithm doesn't deliver us. So, And yeah, I think Nyege Nyege Festival also, especially in times of pandemic, they managed to gather like multiple African countries and stream the most interesting content ever. You know, like Europe was in a dungeon with lasers and kind of DJs, and Africa was like having hours of videos. Some of them were actually at the exhibition or dancing aloud. So something is boiling there, yeah. And also there's interesting Chinese electronic music stepping in with some kind of surprising layers and yeah. But yeah, I'm waiting for the kick. I'm actually waiting that I can't stand something and I just want to kind of turn it off. That is super challenging. Yeah.